Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Thank you also for your patience while we handle technical issues. I'm Janelle Williams-Hughes, Director of Communications at the Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools Technical Assistance Center, also known as the REMS TA Center. I would like to welcome everyone to the webinar, Incorporating Sextortion Prevention, Response, and Recovery into School EOP Planning. During this webinar, we will provide background information and statistics from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children on Sextortion. We will also share details about how the federal government is working to address the issue through a national threat assessment and through the U.S. Department of Justice's Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. Lastly, we will explain why this issue is important for schools and things districts and schools may want to consider when developing or implementing programs to address sextortion. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the REMS TA Center's website via our webinars page, along with the resource list and a sextortion prevention tips flyer following this event. Before we start, we have a few brief housekeeping items to cover. The following tips will help ensure you are able to download files, hear the audio, request technical assistance, and ask questions during this event. To download a copy of the presentation slides, use the download box on the right-hand side of your screen. Select the name of the handouts you would like to review and click the Download Files button. You can also download the resource list and flyer that I just referenced using the same steps. As a reminder, there is no dial-in for this webinar. Audio is available via the link provided. If you are experiencing difficulty hearing the audio stream, please turn up your computer speaker volume at this time. If you experience any difficulties during the webinar, please contact the REMS TA Center at info@remstacenter.org. You may also request technical assistance using the Q&A tool. Questions are viewable to the webinar moderators only. If you would like to submit questions during the Q&A portion and are not able to do so via the box provided via Adobe Connect, please email your questions to info@remstacenter.org. Finally, to ask a question, use the Q&A tool on the lower right-hand side of your screen. Questions will be answered in the order in which they appear and as time permits following the webinar. Again, if you would like to submit questions during the Q&A portion and are not able to do so using the box on your screen, please email your questions to info@remstacenter.org. Let's first take a look at the agenda for today's webinar. The REMS TA Center will begin with a brief introduction to the webinar. Kevin Gutfleisch of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Stacy Jelenewski of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children will follow with an overview of statistics and trends based on their recent analysis and assessments. After that, Jackie O'Reilly of the U.S. Department of Justice's Office of Juvenile Delinquency and Prevention and Matthew Joy of the Wisconsin Department of Justice will share details on how federal, state, and local agencies are working together to prevent, respond to, and help victims recover from sextortion through the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force program. The REMS TA Center will then share processes schools can use to integrate sextortion into emergency management planning and everyday cyber safety strategies. At the end, we will host a Q&A session. Remember, you can use the Q&A tool on the right-hand side of your screen or email us at info@remstacenter.org with your questions. News articles from across the nation have shown us that students at schools and in school districts have served as sextortion targets, as well as predators, and that educational agencies can play a role in the enforcement process. This includes the story of 3 students from Oregon who received a financial settlement in 2015 after suing the school district for failing to respond appropriately after the girls proved that they had been victimized by fellow students. It also includes the story of a male student at a high school in Wisconsin who posed as a female on the Internet to convince 31 of his male classmates to send more than 300 sexually explicit pictures and videos, some of which he used as threats and as the means to receive sexual favors. The case and the attention it received in the media and from the school community prompted school leaders to host a series of cybersecurity seminars for parents and families during the time of the student's arrest. These stories and others highlight the need for education agencies to develop measures to prevent and protect students from sextortion and to reintegrate and restore survivors back into the learning environment. So what is sextortion? Sextortion has been used to define crimes that occur when someone threatens to distribute your private and sensitive material if you don't provide them images of a sexual nature, sexual favors, or money. It is a form of cyberbullying. As the largest group of Internet users and the segment of the population most likely to use social media, youth are among the vulnerable populations at risk of being victimized by cyber-related crimes. The Crimes Against Children Research Center of the University of New Hampshire and Thorne, a research firm that partners with the tech industry, government, and NGOs to conduct research on predatory behavior, conducted an analysis of those who have been who have faced threats of sextortion. Respondents were recruited mainly through ads on Facebook and asked to complete anonymous surveys if they had been targets of sextortion. The percentages you see on the screen reflect the different places where sextortion happened for their survey respondents. As you can see, it happened on social networks, dating apps, messaging and photo apps, and on gaming platforms. And these included, but were not limited to, Facebook, Twitter, Craigslist, Snapchat, Instagram, FaceTime, Skype, Tinder, Tag, OkCupid, and others. In terms of statistics, keep in mind how many potential victims do not engage in surveys designed to collect information on sextortion due to an increased fear related to use of technology or just due to lack of knowledge that agencies are trying to collect this information. A lot of people want to know who are the perpetrators. Little federal research exists on the psychological profile or common characteristics of sextortionists, although NCMEC will discuss some of the things they learned through their analysis, which includes that perpetrators are often primarily male and strangers. However, they often disguise their identity and or use the identity of others to develop rapport and trust between themselves and victims. They may be adults or other youth, and in some cases, the perpetrator knows the victim. They threaten to expose children and youth to their classmates, friends, parents, and guardians, as well as other persons they are close to, including figures from religious groups. This week, the Washington Post published a series of articles on the screen age, also known as Generation Z or Millennials, that touched on topics related to cyberbullying. One of the articles, titled, "They Call It Bunny Hunting," sheds light on how the Sheriff's Office in Loudoun County, Virginia, is addressing the issue of sextortion. They are doing this in partnership with local schools through their Crime Prevention and Juvenile Resource Units, Technical Safety for Teens program. That article also provided a link to the public service announcement that we are going to watch now, which was produced in collaboration by the U.S. Department of Justice and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, again, two agencies represented on today's webinar. We'll take a moment to watch that PSA now.
Hi, Zach. Here's another video from my special guy. I can't believe we haven't talked all day. I wish you went to my school or a little closer so we could finally meet.
Hey, kiddo. Dinner in an hour. Don't spend too long on the phone.
Okay, fine. I know you've been waiting for this for a while, so I wanted to give you something special. Is this okay?
Who are you? Why are you doing this?
Thank you so much for watching that. So recent stories in the news show us that perpetrators often use a victim's fear that their personal or sensitive images will be exposed to other students and or members of the school community as a means to commit sextortion. Educational agencies can face consequences for failing to respond to reports of sextortion affecting students. Education agencies can also play a vital role in prevention response and recovery, and that's where schools come in. It will be even easier to understand why this topic is one your school or school district should consider tackling once we provide an overview of the issue. So let's do that now. The U.S. Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation have worked in collaboration with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, also called NCMEC, to investigate how sextortion impacts youth and to promote awareness about this emerging issue. On the federal level, steps are being taken to address this issue via the National Strategy for Child Exploitation, Prevention, and Interdiction. In 2010, the National Strategy initiated the National Child Exploitation Threat Assessment, a multi-agency effort to analyze and address the risks posed by child exploitation, which includes sextortion as one of 5 key areas. Kevin Gutfleisch of the FBI will join us to share insight from the 2016 assessment. He is the Unit Chief of the Violent Crimes Against Children Intelligence Unit and currently directs the FBI's global collection, analysis, and dissemination of intelligence pertaining to child exploitation and other crimes against children. Kevin has more than 17 years of experience working on these crimes for the FBI. In 1999, he was chosen as one of the first analysts assigned to the then newly created Crimes Against Children program. He was promoted to Supervisory Intelligence Analyst in 2005. And in 2010, he was promoted to Unit Chief over the FBI's intelligence programs for crimes against children, human trafficking, domestic violence crime, international violent crime, and Indian country crime. After Kevin speaks, Stacey Jelinuski of NCMEC will share results from their analysis of more than 800 sextortion-related tips received to their cyber tip line between 2013 and 2015. Stacey is the research analyst for the Exploited Children Division at NCMEC. She is responsible for conducting various in-depth analytical projects in the division to determine the current and future trends in the reports of sexual victimization against children. In addition, she was the research analyst for NCMEC's Global Research Project, a global survey of international non-governmental organizations working to combat online child sexual abuse. Prior to joining NCMEC, she received a doctorate in social psychology from the University of New Hampshire. The information that Kevin and Stacey will share will help provide an overview of this issue. I'll turn the mic over now to Kevin. Thank you.
Thank you, Janelle. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your attention today on this very important topic. Again, my name is Kevin Gutfleisch. I wanted to speak to you a little bit about the Department of Justice's National Child Exploitation Threat Assessment that my team helped facilitate, including a nationwide survey of more than 1,000 federal, state, and local law enforcement, prosecutors, as well as victim advocates. That survey looked at all different aspects of crimes against children, but the topic of sextortion was certainly the one that raised our concern. Nationwide, it was identified as an exponentially increasing crime problem. The fact that cell phones and tablets have cameras embedded in them and that children are being exploited by using those technologies is without a doubt on the rise. As you can see from the slide, we noted that at least 60% of those who took our survey noted that sextortion was an increasing threat. We just don't see that level of increase in the other types of crimes against children that we surveyed. Only sextortion was identified as growing in that way. The survey was published in April of 2016, and some of the other items that were noted in that results were that children were hurting themselves as a result of being a victim of sextortion. I think that's probably one of the more alarming trends that were identified from the survey. It's not just that they're victims and being forced to produce sexually explicit child pornography of themselves, but in dealing with that victimization, they're hurting themselves. They're engaging in cutting, other forms of self-harm. They exhibit depression, and we've even seen instances of children attempting as well as committing suicide. The FBI's research, back one slide please. The FBI's research helped inform the DOJ threat assessment. And what my team found was, in looking at FBI cases, we had victims of sextortion committing or attempting suicide 23% of the cases we studied. We just don't see children committing suicide or harming themselves in this way in other types of crimes against children the FBI investigate, not in sex trafficking and not in traditional child pornography cases. In addition, sextortion victims are not just teenagers that you would expect at the traditional internet age. We've seen sextortion victims as young as 9 years old. And in addition, our research has found that many sextortion victims had been forced to sexually exploit other children, including younger siblings and friends. So I just want to highlight that although this particular threat most commonly impacts victims using the internet, it also impacts friends and family of those victims who could easily be younger. I'm sorry, back one more slide, please. The final findings that we found, would you please go back one slide? Thank you. The other findings that the survey and the threat assessment highlight are that the offenders who are committing sextortion, these perpetrators, have significantly more victims than perpetrators of any other types of crimes against children. It's very common in a sextortion case that an offender may have hundreds of victims for every one offender out there. And you saw in the PSA a moment ago all the different folders, and that particular depicted victim was just one of many. That is extremely common, and by the time that law enforcement investigates an offender, they may have countless victims that have to be identified and rescued. One other factor I just wanted to highlight, and then I'll turn it over to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, is that sextortion involves those victims who are forced to produce sexually explicit content. Unfortunately, FBI investigations have encountered cases where up to thousands of victims who were not forced to produce sexually explicit content, but unfortunately they're willingly exposing their breasts or conducting other inappropriate sexually explicit activity online willingly without being forced to do so. Those victims can have those videos recorded and they're being sexually exploited without their knowledge. In addition, they are prime targets to become sextorted themselves. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has received hundreds of tips regarding sextortion, so next I'll turn it over to my colleague Stacy from NCMEC to elaborate further. Stacy?
Thanks, Kevin. It's my pleasure to be here today to talk about this important topic and basically to share what we've learned about sextortion through our cyber tip line reports. So first, just to give a little background about the cyber tip line, if we can go back one slide for a minute. Thanks. Essentially, the cyber tip line functions as a clearinghouse between the public or internet companies and then law enforcement. So essentially, reports typically come in from the public. They can make those online at cybertipline.org, or internet companies will send reports directly to us on things that they've seen on their own websites. And then the analysts here will add value to those reports. So they'll run different searches. They'll try to find out information about certain URLs that are reported to us, usernames, that sort of thing. And then reports are essentially sent back out to law enforcement so they can continue their further investigation. In some cases, law enforcement will directly contact us, even if the public hasn't made a report to us first, and they'll basically ask for additional information to what they already know. If it's a case where internet companies need to be notified of something on their particular website or platform, our analysts will reach out to them and try to have that information, that picture or that video removed, and if needed, follow up again with law enforcement and internet companies. So the analysis that I'm going to talk about today, now that we've briefly talked about how we're receiving our reports, is essentially an examination of just over 800 cyber tip line sextortion specific reports that occurred over about a 1.5-year span. Even though the cyber tip line receives reports on many different topics of child sexual exploitation, for today's presentation we're going to be focusing on those sextortion reports. And what we found is very consistent with what we've already talked about in this webinar today, both in the intro and what Kevin was just speaking about and with the FBI's findings. Our offenders are primarily male, and these are primarily strangers to people that report to the cyber tip line. While this may not necessarily be the case with all sextortion cases out there in the general population, what we're seeing with cyber tip line reports are that these are people that are basically anonymous to the children. We also find that they truly want to try to stay anonymous, so they go to great lengths to try to hide their identity, and we'll talk about some of those tactics in a minute. Unfortunately, age was really too difficult to determine to really provide you with any kind of legitimate range or average age, and this is solely based on the offenders, again, really trying to remain anonymous, trying to do anything that they can to do to hide their age, often even their gender, and other factors about them. The children in our reports are overwhelmingly female, ages ranging all the way as young as 8 years old, even though those tend to be slightly outliers, but all the way up to 17 years old, because again, we're dealing with children here, so anything under 18. But what's interesting is that we tend to see an average age of 15 years old, regardless of which group we're talking about. So whether it's females, whether it's males, or whether it's those children in which gender is unknown, 15 years old kind of seems to be that magic number. And lastly, reporters to the cyber tip line tend to be 3 particular groups of people, specifically when we're talking about sextortion, either self-reports, parent or guardian reports, or lastly, internet companies making reports based on things that they're seeing, either using their own software or other people at these companies that, review different information, people communicating on their sites, having conversations, and if they've noticed something that's concerning, they'll make a report to us. And lastly, I just want to mention that in terms of reporters, even though we see those 3 most common reporters, female children tended to have a greater variety of reporters. So even in addition to those 3, so we'll see things like peers reporting more commonly for female children as well as others. And there could be a variety of reasons for that. But for female children, again, we might see that friends are reporting, significant others, brothers and sisters, whereas we're not necessarily seeing that great variety of reporters for male children. So one of the first things that I want to talk about in terms of our findings that I thought was really interesting when I started looking at how quickly the sextortion begins. So what we mean here is specifically when it's able to be determined in our reports, how quickly the sextortion is beginning after the child either gives or is manipulated into giving the content to the offender. So after they get that first image, is the offender trying to blackmail them right away for whatever their ultimate goal is, or are they waiting a period of time? And what you see in this graph here is that the vast majority are trying to blackmail the children immediately. So when I say immediately, I mean any time between hours, days, anything up to a month tops would be what we're considering immediate here. However, there are a smaller percentage of cases where offenders seem to be waiting. So they get this content from the children, again, pictures, videos, and then they seem to go dormant for a very long period of time. Sometimes it's several months, but as you can see here, sometimes as long as 2, 3, or 4 years. So I think what's interesting, in addition to the fact that offenders are not always blackmailing children immediately, although most of the time they seem to be, but is that it really seems to confuse the children when it's happening after a longer period of time. So in our reports, especially when it's been years, we'll also read about children saying that, I don't even know this person, I don't know how they got this information, I've never sent a picture out like this, or, you know, I sent this picture to my boyfriend, you know, quote unquote, 5 years ago. You know, and there could be a variety of reasons for this confusion. Either it's because it was just such a long time ago and the children don't remember sending the picture, or oftentimes, like I mentioned, offenders will try to hide their identities. So if the child sent a picture to somebody who they thought was their online boyfriend, and then 2 years later they're getting harassed by a different screen name, they may not make the connection that it's actually the same offender just playing different roles. So next I want to talk about the top places where sextortion seems to be occurring based on our reports. Certainly in line with Thorne's research, we're seeing that the top 3 places that sextortion is occurring online are social networking sites, also chat applications on cell phones, even including anonymous applications where offenders can create anonymous profiles and, you know, chat with children anonymously, and lastly on live streaming applications. So those are the top 3 places, and while we do see many reports where only one of these types of platforms are mentioned, there are also quite a few reports, honestly probably almost equally mentioned, where multiple platforms are being used at some point in the communication. And when multiple platforms are being mentioned, it doesn't seem to be just at random. There seems to be a very particular pattern whereby the offenders commonly will meet these children on social networking sites where maybe the children will friend them easily, especially if they're a friend of a friend, you know, gain their trust in that way, find out personal information about them, such as where they go to school, who their peers are, maybe even some information about where they live, see pictures of them, that sort of thing. And then after that, we'll then start to push them to either get on anonymous messaging applications on their phone or video chat, you know, so essentially live streaming. And you see these pushes in these conversations where they'll just keep pushing and pushing the child to talk to them on one of these 2 formats. And initially, they'll often seem to go for either, but if the child first will only talk to them on a live chat application on their phone, like text messaging anonymously, then they'll further continue to push for that live stream. And essentially the point being here that they're able to get more and more egregious content from the children and to do so anonymously, whereas they may not be able to do that necessarily on the social networking site that they originally connected with them on. And then lastly, in this pattern, we start to see those social networking sites coming back into play where, you know, initially they connected with them there, but now they're using that as essentially blackmail. So if you don't continue to give me more content, if you don't, you know, meet up with me for sex, if you don't send me money, I'm going to post this online for your family and friends to see. I know where you go to school. And suddenly it's those personal pieces of information that they collected at the beginning that didn't seem too harmful to the child are now the things that they're being blackmailed with. In our reports, we see, as I just mentioned, 3 common apparent motives that offenders seem to have for sextortion. In our reports, content, so pictures or videos, seems to be the, you know, by far the most common apparent motive that offenders have, followed by money, and lastly, sex. We can also see in this graphic that when it comes to content, so again, offenders wanting pictures or videos, females seem to be harassed for that significantly more often, whereas when it comes to money as an outcome, so send me $500 by tomorrow via such and such method, males seem to be experiencing that significantly more often. And lastly, our least common apparent motive here, sex, you know, meeting up for some kind of sexual activity, that males and females seem to be experiencing that equally as often when it comes to sextortion. And here's just a quick view at the range of different manipulation tactics that offenders seem to try to use to achieve those goals that we just talked about. So this is the majority of manipulation tactics that we're seeing. And it really runs the gamut. So you can see on the left-hand side that the two most common forms of manipulation that offenders engage in are threatening to post that content online and specifically threatening to post it for family and friends to see. So oftentimes these go hand in hand. So this would be if an offender somehow managed to get a picture of a child or a video. Maybe it's not even that bad. You know, the first one is maybe a bra picture or bathing suit or, you know, just something slightly embarrassing enough that the child would then feel pressured into continuing to give content. And then those manipulation tactics can continue to be used to get further and further content if that's the goal. So as they get more and more egregious content, those images continue to be used against them to get worse and worse images. And in some very extreme examples, children are manipulated and forced into providing directed video where the offender is essentially acting as a director telling the child, you have to send me a 10-minute video doing X, Y, and Z thing to yourself or to your brother or sister or another peer in order for me not to post this online. Some other manipulation tactics that we've seen in our reports are essentially pretending to be friendly with the child, saying that it's going to be a reciprocal type of situation, so I'll show you, you show me kind of thing, except after the child shares their images, obviously the offender doesn't share theirs, and then the child's images are used against them. Some other ones are unknowingly recording the child, so if they end up on a live stream and the child doesn't know otherwise, the next thing you know the offender has said, well, I've recorded you doing such and such, and now I'm going to blackmail you with that video or that picture. Other ones include pretending to be a female, pretending to be younger, developing a positive rapport with the child, so either befriending them or pretending to be a boyfriend or girlfriend. And moving down along the line, in the middle there, we have physically threatening the children, and so on and so forth. Now, the things here that I want to point out that are circled have to do with where we see statistically significant differences. So while all male and female children are experiencing this range of different manipulation tactics, they're statistically experiencing them fairly equally, except for the ones that are circled. So in the ones that are circled, we can see that the male children are experiencing these particular manipulation tactics significantly more often. However, these different tactics aren't, as we looked into it more and more, aren't experiencing them at random. These ones that are circled actually combine together to create a particular story or situation that male children seem to experience significantly more often than females. And that basically is that male children are talking to somebody online who they believe to be a female and to be younger. They think that they're going to be engaging in a reciprocal situation. So again, an I'll show you, you show me situation. And so they get on live stream with this person, this young woman. And after showing themselves or doing things on camera, they find out that they've been unknowingly recorded. And then they're threatened. And then if we can remember back to those objectives that offenders have, we remember that male children were blackmailed for money more often, and so that also kind of comes into combination with this pattern where this whole situation happens and then they'll say, well, I have this recording of you, you better send $500 to me tomorrow or I'm going to post this online for your family and friends to see. So I think the underlying point here is that offenders are using a vast majority of different manipulation tactics. Oftentimes they'll use multiple in combination, and they're really just doing whatever they can here to achieve their ultimate goals. As has already been mentioned in this webinar, sextortion truly has a negative effect on children, and we certainly see that in our cyber tip line reports. In our cyber tip line reports, when children are self-reporting or when parents are reporting for them, the information that they provide is voluntary. There are very few pre-selected fields that we ask reporters to fill in. Typically, it's just an open, descriptive, an open-ended box where they can describe what's happened in the situation. And so when we're talking about negative outcomes here, this is not some kind of assessment necessarily or even specific questions about what kind of negative outcomes have you experienced. These would be negative outcomes that, again, the children or their parents or another reporter on their behalf is voluntarily providing, saying that they're feeling a sense of hopelessness, fear, anxiety, that they've been engaging in self-harm, and continuing on the scale to even having suicidal ideation or having made suicide attempts as being some of the more serious ends of things. And when we try to compare those manipulation tactics being used against children and what seems to be more commonly happening when children are experiencing these negative outcomes, we see that there are particular manipulation tactics used when children or their families are also bringing up that they're experiencing negative outcomes as a result of the sextortion. Interestingly, we see that these top 2 bullet points here, so threats to assault or rape the child, so making those physical threats, are being mentioned in reports at the same time that negative outcomes are mentioned, as well as threats to more of those, the children's social circle, so it's more of those psychosocial, emotional types of threats. So we have both the physical and the psychosocial, emotional kinds of threats, both being linked to negative outcomes also being mentioned. And that would be, with those 2 top bullet points, that would be any negative outcome. The very last bullet point specifically is referring to when children or their families have reported that the children are experiencing suicidal ideation or actually have made suicide attempts. And that particular manipulation tactic is when the offender has tried to develop a positive rapport with the child, so trying to establish some kind of relationship and trust ahead of time, pretending to be their friend or pretending to be their boyfriend or girlfriend. And we can only speculate as to why that seems to be linked with them mentioning that they've tried to attempt suicide or have suicidal ideation. So this is pure speculation, but it just might be that it's really just such a shock to them if somebody has befriended them and really that trust has been destroyed, as opposed to the other manipulation tactics that we just saw on that previous slide. So lastly, before I turn it back over, I just want to say that obviously sextortion, not that I need to convince anybody here, but can be a very harmful behavior, as we just saw with some of the negative outcomes. So obviously we're very, very concerned with prevention, intervention, raising awareness, creating awareness with children, parents, law enforcement, in school systems. And so our findings that we just talked about, as well as all of the other findings that we didn't have time to mention here that we've gained from our reports, essentially we get to fortunately turn back around and hand over to our prevention team and our outreach team so that they can incorporate it into their particular programs. One in particular that I want to mention is netsmarts.org, so NETSMARTZ.org. And NetSmarts basically is an online resource for parents, law enforcement, children, educators, basically the list goes on of people that might be able to benefit from these resources. And these include age-appropriate activities which try to teach children how to stay safe online. They address some of the things that we're talking about today, as well as a host of other issues. And so certainly, it's very beneficial that here at NCMEC, not only are we able to, run these analyses, but then we're able to turn that information back over and try to add knowledge back to our prevention programming, to make them even more relevant. We've also tried to increase, we can go back one more slide really quickly. We've also tried to use this information to increase knowledge and awareness in other ways too. So we've created a fact sheet, and that can be found at missingkids.org/sextortion. And this is just a little bit more of a formal fact sheet that includes a lot of the statistics that I've talked about today, as well as a lot of the other ones that I said we couldn't include all of them here today, but that would be a resource that you could check out. We also were able to use our findings to help inform that PSA that we just watched a few minutes ago. So that was really beneficial to be able to, talk about how exactly offenders are speaking to children, what kind of language and terminology are they using, how are they manipulating kids, and let's create a PSA that's very accurate to what we're seeing in our cyber tip line reports. And lastly, these findings have also really allowed for further collaboration with other NGOs such as Thorn. So at the beginning of this webinar, we talked a little bit about some findings that Thorn had discovered in a recent sextortion study. And it's also allowed us some further collaboration with federal agencies such as the FBI. So once we analyzed all of our findings, it was great to be able to be in contact with the FBI and to be able to share what we were finding and to see, are we seeing the same things? Are we seeing anything different? And continue to work on prevention and intervention from there. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Kevin with the FBI to kind of just reiterate the importance of prevention intervention. Thank you.
Thanks, Stacy. Certainly you've heard lots of disturbing information about this threat, but there is definitely good news. This is a growing threat for sure, but it's also the most preventable. It seems to be more preventable than most other child exploitation. There are very simple things that students and parents and educators can do. Students can take steps to avoid becoming a victim of sextortion. They don't need any special cybersecurity training or software to do it. Students and parents can get educated about the common ways that offenders target their victims. Students can report incidences of sextortion or attempted sextortion to law enforcement who's in a position to investigate these offenders. And I'll be back at the end of the presentation to share a little bit more specific safety tips that students, their parents, and educators can take. So now I'll turn it back to Janelle.
Thank you so much, Kevin, and thank you so much, Stacy. We will now shift the presentation to look at how federal agencies are collaborating with state and local agencies to support prevention, response, and recovery as it relates to sextortion. Jackie O'Reilly is the Program Manager in the Youth Development, Prevention, and Safety Division of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention within the U.S. Department of Justice. She currently works on various programs at OJJDP to include the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force Program, Youth with Sexual Behaviors Program, and mentoring child victims of commercial sexual exploitation and domestic sex trafficking. Ms. O'Reilly is a licensed independent clinical social worker who has worked on child abuse and victim services issues for more than 20 years. Her prior direct service work has included providing assistance to terrorism victims, conducting forensic interviews of child sexual abuse victims and child witnesses to violence, providing clinical case management of child abuse and domestic violence cases, and working as a child protective services social worker. Matthew Joy is a director at the Wisconsin Department of Justice and also serves as that state's ICAC Task Force Commander. In those capacities, Matt oversees the ICAC program at the Wisconsin Department of Justice, which includes task force management, digital forensics, and investigations and operations. In his role as task force commander, he interacts with law enforcement and criminal justice partners to collaborate on investigations, prosecutions, and community outreach. I'm going to turn the mic over now to Jackie to share information about OJJDP's involvement.
Hello, good afternoon. OJJDP funds the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force Program. We reference it as the ICAC Task Force Program. The ICAC Task Force Program is a national network of 61 coordinated task forces representing over 3,500 federal, state, and local law enforcement and prosecutorial agencies. These agencies are engaged in both proactive and reactive investigations, digital forensic investigations, and criminal prosecutions. By helping state and local agencies develop effective, sustainable responses to online child victimization, including responses to the online sharing of child sexual abuse images, OJJDP has increased the capacity of thousands of communities across the country to combat Internet crimes against children. The program was developed in response to the increasing number of children and teenagers using the Internet, the proliferation of child sex abuse images available electronically, and the increased online activity by predators seeking unsupervised contact with potential underage victims. The program was started in 1998. It was a line item under the fiscal year 1998 Justice Appropriations, and OJJDP decided to create a nationwide ICAC Task Force program. Currently, the program is authorized under the Providing Resources, Officers, and Technology to Eradicate Cyber Threats to Our Children Act of 2008. We commonly refer to it as the PROTECT Act. The ICAC Task Force program helps state and local law enforcement agencies develop an effective response to technology-facilitated child sexual exploitation and Internet crimes against children. The help provided through the ICAC Task Force program encompasses forensic and investigative components. Training and technical assistance is provided, victim services, as well as community education. As stated, the program was started in 1998. And since that time, the ICAC task forces have More than 500,000 law enforcement officers of the prosecutors and other professionals involved in the ICAC Task Force program have been trained on techniques to investigate and prosecute internet crimes against children-related cases. Since 1998, the ICAC Task Forces have reviewed more than 580,000 complaints of alleged child sexual victimization, resulting in the arrest of more than 60,000 individuals. In 2015 alone, the 61 ICAC Task Force conducted more than 54,000 investigations and 61,000 forensic examinations and trained more than 34,000 law enforcement personnel, over 3,600 prosecutors, and more than 9,400 other professionals working in the ICAC field. As stated before, there are 61 Internet Crimes Against Children task forces across the country. Many of our task forces have reported an increase in working sextortion cases. Each state has an ICAC task force, while some states have multiple task forces. And all of our ICAC task forces routinely partner with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and the FBI on these types of cases. Now I'm going to turn this over to Matt Joy, the Wisconsin Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force Commander, who will talk about what he has seen in his task force on this issue.
Very good. Thank you, Jackie. I appreciate that. And welcome, everyone. Thanks for participating in today's webinar. So a little bit about me. The information I've decided to share today, I've labeled current trends and themes from the field. I've been associated with the ICAC Task Force for about 8 years, and the information I'm sharing is based upon 5 years of investigative work, 1 year of direct supervision of ICAC-related cases, and then the last 2.5 years as ICAC commander. And I'll be touching on and reiterating some of the things that have been mentioned throughout this presentation. The primary purpose of my participation is to make everyone aware of the ICAC task forces, and really that we're here to assist schools with preventative measures through internet safety training, as well as responding to incidents that occur in your systems. So one of the things that I've recognized or seen is what I call evolving levels of sophistication. You know, years ago, largely these kinds of offenses or incidents occurred between unknown people that sort of randomly met on large chat platforms or large social networks, probably lived a far distance away from one another, and typically the requests would be primarily just for more pictures. Send more pictures, send more pictures. What we're seeing now is an increasing amount of known victimization, so targeting people who are known to the offender. We find that when perpetrators know or already know their victims, they have more information that they can use to further the exploitation. They know some of the fears or the perceived weaknesses or things that can be of benefit to that extortion and to further that grooming process. Children as victimizers. It's important that we remember that the folks who are offenders frequently are also children. So we need to get away from the idea that only adults victimize children. Children can commit sophisticated crimes, and I've investigated and supervised investigations where the perpetrators of the crimes that were highly sophisticated using advanced technologies or sophisticated grooming and targeting techniques were also children. So please remember that. Hidden apps and shared passwords, using technology to facilitate sharing digital media covertly, using third-party servers to avoid detection. Again, going back to that sophistication. There are a number of apps that are available right now on mobile or tablet devices that appear to be picture apps or other utilities like calculators where people can hide images, so using secret passwords or vaults. to avoid detection. Also using multiple platforms, and that was referred to earlier, and that's where the shared passwords comes into play. So obtaining digital files and putting them on a third-party server like a Flickr or a Photo Bucket, one of these sort of online third-party vendors that promote or offer picture sharing, and then providing a password to other people in the school for the purpose of having access to these images or videos. And then also increased demands, and somebody touched upon that previously as well. So we're seeing increased levels of violence and requests for self-harm. We're seeing increased requests to meet in person. So as I alluded to earlier, typically years ago, most of the online exploitation was requests for more images, please send more images or this. Now it's, we're meeting in person. I want you to take a video and I want you to do this harmful thing to yourself. And also increased demands in terms of the what-ifs if somebody does not participate by sending or complying with requests for more images. So I know where your family resides, and I will hurt your parents. I will hurt the family pet, these kinds of things. And so increased levels of violence towards family members in order to obtain these additional images or to meet in person. So as far as the victim response, it's really important to be aware of not only certainly the impact to the victim, obviously, but how this affects the school setting as well. So sextortion leading to bullying, depression and anxiety, school performance. NCMEC and the FBI touched upon the work that they're doing related to suicide. Remember that both genders are affected by this. Children, as NCMEC shared, as early as first, second grade. What are the coping mechanisms for a second or third grader? What does that look like? And so it's important to be ahead and think about these things because I'm here to tell you that this is happening all over the country. And awareness, vitally, critically important to this issue, but how do we respond to these things? This speaks to the importance of internet safety, period. So as Kevin had mentioned, how do we prevent sextortion? Well, we prevent sextortion by reminding people that we don't share personal information. We don't share images. We don't communicate with people we don't know. If there are no images or information to be extorted with, there is no sextortion. So it's reminding people, students, parents, about the basic internet safety and awareness. And so the aftermath in and for schools, really I can provide you with one name, and I would urge you to Google this name and do some, some homework and learn about the Anthony Stansel, S-T-A-N-C-L. Anthony Stansel, a young man from New Berlin, Wisconsin. That investigation was actually described in one of the first slides in today's presentation. Anthony Stansel was the individual who extorted dozens of individuals in his school. And you can read about the aftermath and, what does this look like in your school when these things happen? I assure you that local media, if not national media, will be responding and reporting on these kinds of things. So obviously important to remember that. And then how do the criminal justice system's responses, how do we develop relationships with school resource officers and local law enforcement, encouraging your ICAC task force partners in your areas to come to schools for presentations and to meet IT personnel. Sometimes we see that the IP addresses or school-provided devices, the iPads and other tablets, The school emails are used as part of the exploitation. And so good to build relationships between investigators and the technical personnel who will be assisting with ensuring children's safety. Schools, counselors, teachers, other education professionals have to be aware of this issue. And what is the relationship in your area with social services, the district attorney's offices, or state's attorney's offices, and remembering those kinds of things. So we can move to my next slide, which discusses just a couple of examples. How do these incidents begin? What can this look like? NCMEC identified that they provide cyber tip reports to the ICACs. We do receive reports from the cyber tip line. We receive reports from parents directly, as well as schools. And so this can take a number of forms, as you've learned, whether it be an adult corresponding with a student, whether it be a student corresponding with another student. This can have a number of different faces, so to speak. The crush was an example of a case that occurred here where two high school-aged students who knew each other. There was a girl who had a crush on one of her classmates. Students in the school became aware of the crush. The individual on whom the crush was had, so to speak, the male, it was not a mutual feeling, but informed the girl that were she to send pictures of herself, that that may convince him otherwise, and that they could potentially date. And initially, the girl did decline. However, he continued to encourage her to send these images, implying that they could date if she sent these images. Ultimately, she did. He immediately stopped communicating with her and extorted her to provide him with money in order for him to not show other children in the school these images. That's one example. Another example, the breakup that we commonly see is where images had been shared between a boyfriend and girlfriend, or two individuals who are dating, and the relationship sort of goes sour, and now the images exist, and well, one person doesn't feel the same way about the breakup and will continue to date. Otherwise, I'm going to share these images with other students in the school. And then the new student, that's the Anthony Stansel investigation that occurred several years ago. And this really answers the question as to how does this happen? I think some people could, I suppose, understand why people would or do share images. That's children and adults. Why do people engage in those kinds of behaviors? I mean, I guess we can sort of, rationalize why that happens. But once that happens, then how do people become further victimized through extortion or sextortion? How does this happen? Why is it so difficult for somebody to just say, no, and go talk to parents or school resource officers or teachers or other professionals in the schools? How does this happen? And in the Anthony Stansel investigation, Tony or Anthony had posed as a new student in the school. He posed as a female. We do see oftentimes, as my first two examples highlighted, the victim and the offender know each other. There's no pretending to be somebody else. Well, in the Anthony Stansel investigation, he pretended to be a new female student. He friended boys on Facebook. Ultimately was able to convince over 30 boys to send him images that were sexually explicit. And once he had these images, he told his classmates, here's who I really am. You will meet me at the park, in the school bathroom, in a vehicle, and we will engage in sexually explicit behaviors. Otherwise, I'm going to turn these pictures over to everyone in the school, and everyone's going to see your explicit images. That alone was enough to extort at least 31 boys that we know of to meet with Anthony Stansel in person to engage in a sexual assault, to be sexually assaulted by Anthony Stansel as part of this extortion. They were so concerned, driven by fear of release of these images, that they were extorted into this further victimization. So we need to remember that that this is very, just having these images or any information about their colleagues is enough to further the victimization. So obviously, as Kevin had mentioned, crime on the rise, but there's hope, because and I think it's just, we need to continue to collaborate and further provide information to students, parents, caregivers about the dangers of sharing information, and working collaboratively with justice systems, district attorneys' offices, social services, and what do these investigations look like in terms of charging, prosecution, especially when it's other classmates known to one another. How do we use this to further prevent exploitation in other communities? So please remember, the ICACs are here to help with you if you're looking at internet safety or assisting collaboratively with issues that arise in your schools. And with that, I will turn it over to the next presenter.
Thank you so much, Matt, and thank you so much, Jackie. The previous examples and statistics presented by our federal partners highlight the importance of including sextortion in school EOPs and as a part of regular day emergency management and school safety activities, including behavioral threat assessments conducted via social media, a topic that we covered during last week's webinar, Use of Social Media in School Behavioral Threat Assessment. So why integrate sextortion into school EOPs? All schools should have an emergency operations plan. The goal of an EOP is to keep the whole school community safe before, during, and after a threat or hazard occurs. And EOPs address more than hurricanes and earthquakes and other natural disasters. They also address adversarial and human-caused threats such as cyberbullying and sextortion. A lot of the people on the phone are likely familiar with the Guide for Developing High-Quality School Emergency Operations Plan, which was developed in collaboration by the U.S. Department of Education, Justice, led by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Department of Homeland Security, led by FEMA, and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Within that school guide, the National Preparedness Goal and the National Preparedness System is outlined, which describes the nation's approach to preparedness and defines it around 5 mission areas: prevention, mitigation, protection, response, and recovery. Of the 5 mission areas, prevention may be the most important in the context of sextortion, as we want to stop it from occurring in the first place. However, protection, response, and recovery are also key elements, as schools can work to develop tools to protect students when they are using technology during school hours, respond to threats of sextortion made by students, and support student victims and perpetrators in efforts to help them recover from an incident of sextortion and to restore them back into the learning environment. And these mission areas generally align with 3 time frames associated with the incident: before, during, and after. And when it comes to sextortion, the planning team will want to ensure that these 5 missions continue during all of those processes, before, during, and after. The guide also outlines a 6-step planning process for developing an EOP. Step 1 is to form a collaborative planning team, and this step is critical when it comes to sextortion, as partners including local and federal law enforcement, mental health professionals, and technology staff all play a key role in prevention, protection, response, and recovery. The school guide notes that Effective school planning depends on a consistent analysis and comparison of threats and hazards a particular school faces. And so during step 2, schools should try to understand their situation. As core emergency management planning teams across the country work to identify and assess the risk posed to them, they should conduct research to determine whether to add sextortion to their watch list. A clear picture of student experiences with sextortion might be gained by conducting a culture and climate assessment and/or by requesting information from partners, including local and federal law enforcement, on the number of reported cases in a school community. During step 3 of the process, the planning team determines goals and objectives and courses of action. After assessing the level of risk posed by sextortion, emergency management planning teams should work to determine goals and objectives to achieve the best outcome for before, during, and after an incident of sextortion occurs, as illustrated later. Once goals and objectives have been developed, core planning teams can work to create courses of action to begin preventing, responding to, and help students recover from sextortion. The ultimate goal is to create a program that is informed and guided by national, state, and local research and legislation framed around prevention, response, and recovery, and one that is designed for sustainability. There are a lot of sextortion cases in the news, from FEI and NCMEC, that education agencies can use to support scenario-based planning, which helps ensure that staff are not only sure what to do, but who is supposed to do what and how quickly. During step 5, the planning team will create a draft plan and circulate that draft to obtain feedback from those responsible for implementing the plan. A sextortion annex may be included as a part of this EOP and will include the goals, objectives, courses of action, a list of prevention and response contacts, and any other items pertinent to a school's efforts to prevent, respond to, and help students recover from sextortion. Finally, in step 6, plan implementation and maintenance, the plan is reviewed, revised, and maintained. Also, exercises are conducted to validate the plan. Sextortion prevention teams might use exercises as a chance to make sure that superintendents, principals, vice principals, prevention intervention counselors, and everyone knows how and when to report incidents to the local police department. So we talked a little bit about goals and objectives that schools can create related to sextortion, so we just wanted to go over some examples here. A before example would be to prevent a student from becoming a sextortion victim or predator. And an objective related to that goal may be to add a sextortion prevention training for all students and staff as a part of health education, cyber safety and security, technology, and/or anti-bullying programs. A second goal that represents the during time frame is using reporting and intervention services in collaboration with law enforcement and mental health partners. An objective for that goal would be to require reporting all incidents of sextortion to the proper authorities. And example number 3, which relates to the after time frame, is to provide restoration services to students to reintegrate them back into the learning environment. An objective for that time frame is to provide continued school counseling services to survivors of sextortion. As noted before, once your planning team develops these goals and objectives, it's important to develop the courses of action, or the who, what, when, where, why, and how to carry out these objectives, and to make sure everyone holding roles in prevention, response, and recovery has been trained appropriately. There are various methods schools and school districts can use to address this issue. A comprehensive sextortion program addressing protection, prevention, response, and recovery may include courses of action for the following populations: school emergency managers, school instructional and curriculum development staff, school mental health staff, teachers and students, community partners, and parents and guardians. We'll just go quickly over some action steps related to each of those audiences now. For school emergency managers, you may encourage them to add sextortion to the list of adversarial and human-caused threats within school EOPs, and then direct them to develop goals, objectives, and courses of action for faculty, staff, and community partners, including law enforcement. Action steps for school curriculum development staff may include including instructional materials on sextortion as a part of health education, cybersecurity, and/or anti-bullying programs. You can also conduct train-the-trainer sessions so that information can be easily communicated to new teachers and staff. Action steps for school mental health staff include training school counselors and mental health practitioners on risk factors and signs of students who are and may become victims or perpetrators of sextortion. You should also consider training them on how to implement counseling services to support survivors, perpetrators, and families who are often affected. Action steps for teachers include creating checklists for them on what to do when they suspect a student has become a victim or is perpetrating the crime. It can also create flyers that teachers can use to promote daily cyber safety practices among students and use those flyers to engage students as well. Action steps for students include creating a peer-to-peer network of student leaders to encourage students to report incidents of sextortion, suspected perpetrators, and to not participate in the photo sharing aspect often associated with this crime. You can also encourage students to share information about tip lines available through federal agencies, NCMEC, and local agencies that students can use to report sextortion. And lastly, action steps for community partners may include developing memorandums of agreement with those partners that outline how you will work together to report, respond to, and help students in school communities recover from cases. You may also consider conducting a capacity assessment with your community partners to determine gaps in prevention planning and how you can work with those partners to close those gaps. And I'm going to turn the presentation back over to Kevin of the FBI now just to talk a little bit more about what else schools can do.
Thank you. As we stated earlier, sextortion is preventable, so what can you all do? I think most important is be prepared. You have to plan. Plan to encounter students who are victims of sextortion or may know a victim of sextortion, because it's happening right now nationwide, as we've heard, and it's increasing. Also plan that some students could possibly be sextortion offenders, as we've also heard examples of. Most importantly is that victims are more likely to report sextortion to friends or students, possibly parents, teachers, nurses, or counselors, much more than the police or the FBI. So we don't want to assume that they're going to call law enforcement first. In order for this kind of victimization to stop, children must come forward and let somebody know so that it can be referred to law enforcement for investigation. We've also just heard that if you can incorporate this type of crime prevention in your internet safety programs, we can share the information and promote awareness. Kids are going to be much more likely and willing to come forward if they know that it's a comfortable environment and that people care. It's critical that we don't rush judgment. These victims, in some circumstances, have done something that's sexual in nature, possibly inappropriate, and it could be devastating the more people who know about it. So we have to have a comfortable environment for them to come forward in, and we need to communicate to youth that it's safe for them to bring these incidences forward to somebody who can actually do something about it. Next slide, please. Just highlighted this a bit already. Again, we want to have a safe environment. We want to be non-judgmental. We don't want to blame the victim. In some instances, the child may feel like they produce a sexually explicit image, and it could be illegal for them to have sent it to somebody else. We must reassure victims that they will not be prosecuted for sending explicit images if they were forced to do so. Now, in the event that they were willingly sending an image and then were forced to do so, the same holds true. They're not going to be prosecuted as producing child pornography if they're forced to do it during the process of their victimization. And also, let's reinforce to our victims that coming forward not only helps them, but think of the countless potential other victims that we can help, past, current, and future, when we identify and apprehend that offender and put him in jail. He will not be able to hurt anybody else, and then we can give comfort to those past victims that he's not still out there. Next slide, please. This type of exploitation is not likely to stop without some type of intervention from law enforcement. And we've heard some scenarios today already where the victim may, the offender may promise if you just send me one picture, send me a video, I stop, I promise, and that's often not the case. They commonly promise that they'll stop, and typically they don't. We also want to make sure that students are aware that they should not delete anything. They are victims of a crime, and anything that they send, receive, or posted, we need to keep that because it's potential evidence for law enforcement. So do not have them delete their accounts, destroy their phone, do anything whatsoever, because we may need that. There could be a critical piece of evidence that we need to investigate. And in some limited circumstances, law enforcement may even be able to take over the identity of that child and then pursue the investigation that way. Ensure that law enforcement is notified immediately, as stated before. I cannot stress that enough. And as we're doing today, we're going to discuss prevention tips with faculty and students. So let's get into some specifics about exactly what can be done. I would hope that many of these points are self-explanatory and that we wouldn't have to remind students of them, but unfortunately we do. Any single thing done online could be available and shared with others, even if you send it to somebody who you trust, even if they send it to somebody who they know. A key thing with sextortion that teens don't seem to understand is that if they conduct any kind of video session or live streaming video, that it can be recorded on the back end by the offender without their knowledge. Perpetrators are easily misrepresenting themselves to appear as other students or children, as we heard, or an adult who wants to befriend a child. It is also possible, as we've seen in some FBI investigations, that an offender may show a video of a child and make it look like it's a streaming live video, so that the victim thinks that they're chatting and streaming live with someone, when in fact it's a recorded video of another child, and then the offender is texting live at the same time to give the appearance that it's true. We also want to ensure that the victim has their apps and social networking privacy settings to the strictest level possible. And be mindful that offenders can easily make fake online profiles and screen names. Next, please. Any time that somebody seeks to engage a child in explicit, sexually explicit chat, text, communications, emails, webcam, that should be reported immediately. We do not need to wait until the point that they're actually a victim of sextortion for that to be reported. No adult should be contacting a child in a sexual manner online whatsoever. The only guarantee to make a perpetrator of sextortion stop is if they're in jail. Next, please. So here are some tips that we hope that you'll share with students at the schools that you work with. And we've also made these available in the handout that's attached called Tips on Preventing Youth from Sextortion that you can see in the bottom of the webinar as one of the attachment links. But here are some things that we've seen from our investigations, the research that's been done by us, the Department of Justice, as well as NCMEC and our other partners. And it was referenced earlier as well. Anything that somebody does online that could be used against them, it doesn't even have to be sexually explicit. Anything they do that they don't want shared with their friends and family on social network could be used to blackmail them for sextortion. If they willingly share any explicit photos, back one please. If children willingly share photos with somebody online, they're more likely to be at risk for sextortion. If they engage in sexting with a boyfriend or girlfriend, as we've heard, those images could be used to blackmail them later if passed on to somebody else or during a breakup. If a victim commonly posts or shares information with strangers online through streaming video websites such as YouTube, they too can be targeted for sextortion. And at times, if victims are vulnerable to hacking or social engineering, then they too can be opening themselves up to victims of sextortion. Next, please. With regard to hacking, we have seen this at times. It's not the largest volume of cases we've seen, but we do have instances where an offender will actually hack a child's computer and then without their knowledge, remotely turn on their webcam or microphone to record them, and then use that surreptitious recording to blackmail them. So most importantly, everybody should be covering up their webcams when they're not in use. Just because it's not on doesn't mean that it can't record if somebody has hacked your computer. So put something to cover up that web camera until you're using it, and when you're done, cover it up again. Make sure your antivirus is up to date so that if there's any viruses on your computer, we can prevent that. And most importantly as well, don't click on attachments from somebody you don't personally know, because that's how hackers can gain access to your computer, through malicious attachments. I'll turn it back over now to Janelle to finish us off.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And thank you to all of our presenters who shared information today, and thank you as well to our participants in today's webinar. We just want to let you know that you can get more information via the resource list that we created to supplement this webinar. It features many of the site's reports and resources from the agencies who were represented today. You can also access the Sextortion Prevention Tips Flyer, which Kevin just mentioned, as well as a fact sheet that we will be disseminating very soon, and that will be available on the webinar archive page of our site. Due to time constraints, we will not be taking any live questions at this time. However, we do encourage you to still submit any questions that you have using the Q&A tool on your screen, and or by emailing the REMS TA Center at info@remstacenter.org. You can also contact the TA Center for any questions or requests for technical assistance at info@remstacenter.org or through the toll-free number 855-781-7367. Again, that's 1-855-781-7367. Our hours of operation are Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. We also encourage you to visit our website for additional information about resources such as our community of practice. You can also view us and follow us on Twitter, TA Center. You can also view the chat that we just held with the FBI under the Sextortion in Schools hashtag, and you can feel free to answer those questions at your convenience on Twitter using that hashtag. Thank you again for participating in this webinar.